The Wyoming wind cut through Sarah McKenna's threadbare coat like a rusty blade, each gust threatening to knock her from the stolen mare's back. Her swollen belly, heavy with 8 months of pregnancy, made every step of the horse an agony. Blood had long since dried on her split lip, but the bruises along her ribs still screamed with each labored breath. "Just a little further," she whispered to the horse, though she had no idea where she was heading. The landscape stretched endlessly, rolling hills covered in early November snow, with dark clouds promising more punishment from the sky. She'd been riding for 3 days since fleeing Cheyenne, surviving on creek water, and the few biscuits she'd managed to grab before Thomas's drunken rage had finally pushed her too far. The mare stumbled, and Sarah felt a sharp pain tear through her abdomen. "Not now," she prayed silently. "Please, not now." But her body had other plans. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the ones that had been plaguing her since dawn, and she doubled over the saddle horn with a cry that the wind swallowed whole. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. A ranch house, sturdy and weathered, sat nestled against a stand of cottonwoods. Cattle dotted the nearby pastures, dark shapes against the white ground. It looked like salvation, but Sarah had learned not to trust appearances. Still, as another contraction gripped her, she knew she had little choice. The mare seemed to sense her desperation and picked up pace toward the ranch. But just as hope began to bloom in Sarah's chest, her vision blurred. The world tilted, and she felt herself sliding from the saddle. The frozen ground rushed up to meet her, and darkness claimed her just as the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Jacob Harrison was splitting wood behind his house when he heard the horse whinny. He paused, axe raised mid-swing, and listened. The sound came again, high and distressed. He set down the axe and walked around to the front of his house, where he found a riderless mare standing near his porch, reins dragging in the snow. "Easy, girl," he murmured, approaching slowly. The horse was lathered with sweat despite the cold, and her eyes rolled white with fear. Jacob caught the reins and examined her, a decent animal, but thin and obviously ridden hard. "Where's your rider?" He scanned the horizon and spotted a dark shape crumpled in the snow about 50 yards from his gate. His heart lurched. Moving quickly but carefully, he approached the fallen figure and felt his breath catch. It was a woman, young and obviously pregnant, her face pale as the snow around her. Blood matted her dark hair, and her lips had a blue tinge that spoke of dangerous cold. Jacob dropped to his knees beside her and pressed his ear to her chest. Her heartbeat was weak but steady. As he lifted her, checking for injuries, she stirred and opened eyes the color of storm clouds. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me. The baby." Before Jacob could respond, she arched her back with a cry of pain that cut through him like a physical blow. He'd seen that look before, felt that same desperate fear. His own wife, Mary, had worn that exact expression 2 years ago during the long, terrible night that had claimed both her and their unborn child. "Ma'am, I'm going to carry you inside," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the memories clawing at him. "You're safe now." As he lifted her into his arms, Sarah's eyes found his face. Even through her pain, she saw something there, not the cruel indifference she'd grown accustomed to, but genuine concern. It was enough to make her believe, for the first time in months, that maybe she would survive this night after all. Chapter 2. Unexpected Sanctuary. Jacob's house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture he'd built himself and a stone fireplace that threw dancing shadows across the walls. He carried Sarah to his bedroom, the only bed in the house, and gently laid her on the quilt Mary had sewn during their brief marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him, but there was no time for painful memories now. "What's your name?" he asked, lighting the oil lamp on the bedside table. "Sarah," she gasped between contractions. "Sarah McKenna. I'm sorry to burden you with this, but I think the baby's coming now." Jacob felt the familiar knot of panic form in his stomach. He'd assisted with cattle births countless times, but human birth was different, dangerous. The nearest doctor was in Laramie, a 2-day ride in good weather. In this growing storm, it might as well have been on the moon. "I'll do what I can," he promised, rolling up his sleeves. "But I'm not a doctor." Sarah gripped his hand with surprising strength. "You're here, that's enough." Another contraction hit and she bit back a scream. I can't go back to him." "Who?" Jacob asked, noting the fear that flickered in her eyes. "My husband, Thomas McKenna." The name came out like a curse. He did this, she touched her bruised face, and worse. I took his horse and ran, but if he finds me— Jacob saw the terror there, recognized it from his own dark moments. He won't find you here, he said firmly. You have my word on that. For the next several hours, Jacob found himself in a situation he'd never imagined, helping bring a child into the world while a blizzard raged outside. Sarah bore her pain with a strength that amazed him, gripping his hands during the worst contractions and apologizing between them for the trouble she was causing. You're not trouble, he assured her, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. You're just a woman in need of help. Most men wouldn't see it that way, she panted, a stranger's pregnant wife showing up at their door. You could have turned me away. Jacob thought of Mary, of all the nights he'd lain awake wishing he could have done more, been better, saved her somehow. I couldn't live with myself if I did that. As dawn broke grey and cold through the bedroom window, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, small but healthy, with a strong cry that filled the house with something Jacob had forgotten existed: hope. He wrapped the baby in one of his clean shirts and placed her in Sarah's arms, watching as the young mother's face transformed with wonder and fierce love. She's beautiful, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Hello, little one. I'm your mama, and I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you. Jacob stepped back, giving them privacy for their first moments together, but Sarah called his name softly. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to repay such kindness. You don't need to repay anything, Jacob replied, though something in his chest had loosened at the sight of mother and child. It was the first time in 2 years that his house had felt like more than just a place to sleep and take shelter from the wind. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, something precious and fragile had taken root. Jacob busied himself making breakfast, acutely aware that this moment, this unexpected gift of new life, was changing something fundamental inside him. He'd spent 2 years believing his capacity for hope had died with Mary. Now, watching Sarah murmur softly to her daughter, he wondered if he'd been wrong about that. The baby's cry echoed through the house, strong and demanding, and Jacob found himself smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers Sarah was running from, they would face them together. The storm had brought her to his door, but something deeper than chance had made him open it. Chapter 3. Healing Wounds. 3 days after the baby's birth, the blizzard finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow drifted against the ranch house windows, and the silence was so complete it seemed to ring in Jacob's ears. He stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the white landscape in shades of gold and pink, while behind him Sarah moved carefully around the room, her daughter cradled in one arm. You shouldn't be up yet, Jacob said without turning around. You need rest. Sarah paused in her task of folding the clean cloths he'd torn from one of his old shirts for the baby. I've rested enough. I can't keep taking advantage of your hospitality without contributing something. Jacob turned to face her, noting how the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. The bruises on her face were fading from purple to yellow-green, but they still made his jaw clench with anger at the man who'd put them there. You're recovering from childbirth, not taking advantage of anything. Still, Sarah said, settling into the chair by the fire with a slight wince, I need to think about what comes next. I can't stay here forever. The words hit Jacob harder than he'd expected. Over the past 3 days, the house had felt different, warmer somehow, filled with quiet conversation and the baby's soft cries. He'd grown accustomed to Sarah's presence at his table, her gentle humming as she tended to her daughter, the way she'd listened with genuine interest when he'd told her about the ranch and his plans for spring roundup. Where would you go? He asked, settling into the chair across from her. Sarah's grip tightened on her daughter. I have a sister in California, Emma. She married a merchant in Sacramento 5 years ago. I could write to her, ask if we could come. That's a long journey for a woman alone with a newborn, Jacob observed carefully. Dangerous, too. More dangerous than staying where Thomas might find us? Sarah's voice carried a tremor she tried to hide. He won't just let me disappear. He'll see it as theft. Me, the baby, his horse. He'll come looking. Jacob leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Tell me about him. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers stroking her daughter's dark hair. I met Thomas in Cheyenne 2 years ago. He was charming then, brought me flowers, told me I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. My parents had died of influenza the winter before, and I was working as a seamstress, barely making enough to keep a room above the shop. She shifted the baby to her other arm, her expression growing distant. The courtship was brief. Thomas said he wanted to take care of me, give me a real home. I thought I was lucky. Her laugh held no humor. The drinking started after we married. Then the accusations, that I was looking at other men, that I was ungrateful, that I was trying to make him look foolish. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward, swore it would never happen again. Jacob's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. But it did. Again and again. Each time was my fault, according to him. I didn't have dinner ready on time, or I spoke too loudly, or I didn't speak at all. When I told him I was carrying his child, I hoped it might change things. Sarah's voice broke slightly. Instead, it got worse. He said the baby probably wasn't even his, called me terrible names. The night I left, he came home drunk and angry about losing money at cards. He blamed me for his bad luck, said I was a curse on his life. "Sarah," Jacob said softly, and she looked up to meet his eyes. "You know none of that was true, don't you? A man who would hurt a woman, especially one carrying his child, that's not a man at all." Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. Some days I believed him. He was very convincing when he wanted to be. He was wrong, Jacob said firmly, about all of it. The baby stirred and made a small sound, and Sarah's expression immediately softened as she looked down at her daughter. "I named her Hope," she said quietly. "Hope Elizabeth, after my mother. It seemed fitting." Jacob felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "It's a beautiful name." "Jacob," Sarah said, her voice hesitant, "you've been so kind to us, and I barely know anything about you. You live alone out here, but you clearly know how to care for people. Do you have family?" The question he'd been dreading came so gently that it almost hurt more than if she'd demanded answers. Jacob stood and walked to the window again, his shoulders tense. "I was married," he said finally. "Mary? She died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and the genuine sympathy in her voice made him continue. "She was pregnant. It was a difficult birth. Lasted 2 days. I rode to Laramie for the doctor, but by the time we got back..." He stopped, the old pain fresh as ever. "I lost them both." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's why you knew what to do when Hope was born. You'd been through it before." "I failed Mary," Jacob said, his voice rough. "I should have done more, No." Sarah's voice was firm, cutting through his self-recrimination. "You can't blame yourself for that. Sometimes terrible things happen, and it's not anyone's fault." Jacob turned to look at her, surprised by the strength in her voice. "How can you say that after what you've been through?" "Because I've learned the difference between the things we can control and the things we can't," Sarah replied. "Thomas chose to hurt me. You chose to help me. Those were decisions. Your wife's death, my parents' illness, those were tragedies, not choices." The wisdom in her words, spoken by someone so young, struck Jacob deeply. For 2 years he'd carried the weight of guilt and failure. Now, looking at Sarah holding little Hope, he began to wonder if maybe it was time to set that burden down. Chapter 4. The Price of the Past. A week later, Jacob was repairing a section of fence damaged by the storm when he spotted riders approaching from the east. 3 men on horseback moving with purpose across the snow-covered range. Jacob's blood ran cold as he recognized the lead rider's expensive coat and silver-trimmed saddle, the kind of flashy gear that marked a man who cared more about appearance than practicality. Thomas McKenna. Jacob dropped his tools and walked quickly toward the house, his mind racing. Sarah was inside with Hope, probably unaware of the approaching danger. He had to warn her, had to figure out how to handle this without putting her or the baby at risk. "Sarah," he called as he entered the house, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency he felt. "We have visitors coming." She looked up from where she sat mending one of his shirts, another small way she'd found to contribute despite his protests. The color drained from her face as she saw his expression. "Is it 3 riders? One of them fits the description you gave me of your husband." Sarah stood quickly, clutching Hope to her chest. The baby, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss. "What do we do? Where can I hide?" Jacob moved to the window and peered out. The riders were closer now, maybe 5 minutes away. "The root cellar," he said. "It's small, but they won't think to look there. Take some blankets to keep Hope warm." "Jacob, I can't ask you to lie for us. If Thomas finds out, you help me." "He won't find out," Jacob said firmly, helping her gather blankets. You're under my protection now, and that means something. As Sarah disappeared into the cellar behind the kitchen, Jacob took a moment to compose himself. He'd faced down rustlers, wolves, and the harsh Wyoming weather, but somehow the thought of confronting the man who'd hurt Sarah made his hands shake with rage. He forced himself to breathe deeply, then walked out onto the porch to meet his unwelcome guests. Thomas McKenna was exactly what Jacob had expected. A soft-looking man in his 30s, with cold eyes and a weak chin hidden behind a carefully groomed beard. His companions were harder men, probably hired guns, judging by the way they sat their horses and the positioning of their gun belts. "Good morning," Jacob called out, his voice neutral. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Thomas dismounted and approached the porch, his eyes scanning the ranch buildings with obvious suspicion. "I'm looking for my wife," he said without preamble. "Sarah McKenna. She stole my horse and ran off about 10 days ago. I've been tracking her trail, and it leads here." Jacob crossed his arms and leaned against the porch rail, projecting calm confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Haven't seen any woman matching that description. Been snowed in for the past week anyway." "That's so." Thomas's smile was unpleasant. "Mind if we take a look around? My wife can be resourceful when she wants to be." "I mind plenty," Jacob replied evenly. "This is private property, and you're not welcome to search it without cause." One of Thomas's companions, a scarred man with dead eyes, moved his hand closer to his gun. "Maybe we should make our own cause, boss." Jacob's own hand drifted toward his Colt, but he kept his expression relaxed. "I wouldn't recommend that course of action. I'm well known in these parts, and the sheriff in Laramie is a personal friend. 3 strangers causing trouble on my land wouldn't be looked upon kindly." Thomas held up a hand to stop his man from drawing. "No need for unpleasantness," he said, though his eyes remained hard. "But I know my wife came this way. Her trail leads right to your gate." "Lot of trails lead through here," Jacob said. "It's open country. Could be she passed through and kept going. Have you checked the settlements to the north?" "We will," Thomas said, remounting his horse. "But if I find out you're lying to me, rancher, you'll regret it. Sarah belongs to me, and I always collect what's mine." Jacob straightened, his own eyes going cold. "Mister, I don't know what kind of woman would run from a man like you, but if I did meet such a person, I'd consider it my Christian duty to help her get as far away as possible." The implied insult hung in the air between them. Thomas's face flushed red, but after a moment he yanked his horse's reins and wheeled away from the porch. "This isn't over," he called back, as the 3 men rode toward the north. Jacob watched until they disappeared over a ridge, then hurried back into the house. "Sarah, they're gone," he called softly. She emerged from the cellar, hope still quiet in her arms, but her face was pale, and her hands trembled. "Did he believe you?" "For now," Jacob said. "But he's not giving up. He'll check the other settlements, and when he doesn't find you there, he might come back." Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of her situation evident in every line of her body. "I've brought danger to your home. I should leave." "No," Jacob said firmly. "Running now would be suicide. You're not strong enough for winter travel with a newborn, and he's got men with him. Professional men by the look of them. Then what do we do?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, thinking. An idea was forming in his mind, radical and unexpected, but perhaps their only real solution. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what would you say to a business proposition?" She looked up at him, confusion clear on her face. "I don't understand." "Marry me," Jacob said simply. "Not for love or romance, but for protection. As my wife legally, you'd have the protection of my name and my ranch. Thomas would have no claim on you or Hope." Sarah stared at him, speechless. Hope chose that moment to let out a small cry, and Sarah automatically began to rock her, her movements mechanical as she processed Jacob's words. "You barely know me," she finally whispered. "I know enough," Jacob replied. "I know you're brave and kind and a good mother. I know you deserve better than what that man gave you, and I know that if we don't do something permanent, he'll never stop hunting you." "But what about you? What about love and finding someone who—" "I had love," Jacob said quietly. "It was beautiful while it lasted, but it's gone now. This would be different. A partnership. A way for both of us to build something better than we have alone." Sarah looked down at Hope, then back at Jacob. In his weathered face she saw only kindness and determination. No false promises of romance, no demands or expectations beyond mutual respect and protection. "It would be a real marriage?" she asked. "Legal?" As real as we choose to make it, Jacob replied. I'm not asking you to share my bed, Sarah. I'm asking you to share my life, in whatever way feels right to both of us. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them both of how harsh and unforgiving this land could be. But inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, something new was taking shape. Not love, perhaps, but something equally valuable. Hope for a future neither of them had dared imagine. Chapter 5. When Hearts Find Home. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood before the mirror in Jacob's bedroom, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a simple blue wool garment she'd worn to church back in Cheyenne. It was the closest thing she had to wedding attire, and despite the unconventional circumstances, she wanted to look proper for the ceremony. Jacob had ridden to Laramie 3 days earlier to arrange everything with Reverend Collins and file the necessary papers with the territorial court. The plan was simple. They would marry quietly, establish legal documentation of their union, and create an unshakable foundation for Sarah's new identity as Mrs. Jacob Harrison. Hope lay sleeping in the wooden cradle Jacob had built during the long winter evenings, her tiny fists curled against her cheeks. At 3 weeks old, she was already showing signs of her mother's determination, crying lustily when hungry and settling contentedly when fed. Jacob had taken to talking to her during his morning chores, telling her about the ranch and the cattle, and Sarah often caught him watching the baby with an expression of wonder that made her heart ache in ways she didn't fully understand. "You look beautiful," Jacob said from the doorway, and Sarah turned to find him dressed in his best suit, a dark wool jacket that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the steady kindness in his brown eyes. "Thank you," Sarah said, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Jacob, are you certain about this? Once we take these vows, there's no undoing them." Jacob stepped into the room, his expression serious. "I'm certain." "Are you?" Sarah looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, then back at Jacob. In the past month, this man had saved her life, delivered her daughter, protected them from Thomas, and offered them a future she'd never dared dream of. He asked for nothing in return, except her partnership in building a life together. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm certain." The ceremony was held in the small church in Laramie, with only Reverend Collins, his wife Martha, and the county clerk as witnesses. Jacob had explained the situation in general terms: a widow in need of protection, a man seeking companionship, and the understanding frontier community asked no uncomfortable questions. As they exchanged vows, Sarah was struck by the sincerity in Jacob's voice when he promised to honor and protect her. When it came time for her own vows, she found herself speaking from the heart. "I promise to be a faithful partner to you, Jacob Harrison, and to help you build a home worthy of the kindness you've shown me and my daughter." When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob gently kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt both respectful and oddly intimate. As they signed the marriage certificate, Sarah noticed Jacob's hand was steady, while hers trembled slightly. He was at peace with this decision in a way that both comforted and amazed her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Hope slept in Sarah's arms, bundled against the February cold, while Jacob handled the wagon with easy competence. As they crested the hill that looked down on the ranch buildings, Sarah felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her parents' death. "It's home now," Jacob said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "It is." That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, the weight of their changed circumstances settled around them. They were married now, legally bound, but still virtual strangers in many ways. "I've been thinking about sleeping arrangements," Jacob said, his tone carefully neutral. "I can take the spare room, or build a partition in the main room if you'd prefer." "Jacob," Sarah interrupted gently, "this is your house, your bedroom. I won't displace you from your own bed." "It's our house now," he corrected, "and I want you to be comfortable." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "What if we shared the room?" she said finally. Not the bed, but the room. You could put another bed against the far wall, and Hope's cradle could stay between us. That way, if she cries at night, we can both tend to her." Jacob considered this, recognizing the wisdom in her suggestion. "That could work. I'll ride into town tomorrow and order another bed frame." "Thank you," Sarah said, "for everything, for giving us not just safety, but a real home." "Thank you," Jacob replied, "for giving me a reason to make this place feel like home again." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Jacob handled the ranch work and the heavier household tasks, while Sarah managed the cooking, mending, and caring for Hope. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking about their plans for the ranch, sharing stories from their pasts, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence. Sarah proved to have a head for numbers and began helping Jacob with the ranch accounts, discovering ways to maximize their profits and reduce expenses. Jacob, in turn, taught her about cattle ranching, explaining the seasonal rhythms of the work and his dreams of expanding the herd. One evening in early March, as Sarah was nursing Hope by the fire, she looked up to find Jacob watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking," Jacob said, "about how quiet this house was before you came, how empty it felt. And now it feels alive," he said simply, "like it has a purpose again." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I never expected to find happiness again after Thomas," she admitted. "I thought my life would be nothing but running and hiding and trying to survive. But here, with you, I feel like I can breathe again." "You're safe here," Jacob assured her. "We both are." As if summoned by their conversation about safety, the sound of approaching horses reached them through the evening air. Jacob immediately stood, his hand moving to the rifle above the mantel. "Stay inside," he told Sarah. But she was already moving, settling Hope in her cradle and reaching for the shotgun Jacob had taught her to use. "We're partners now, remember?" she said firmly. "I won't hide while you face trouble alone." Jacob looked at her, this woman who had arrived broken and frightened but had found strength and courage in the safety of their home, and felt his heart swell with something deeper than mere affection. "Together then," he said, and they moved to the window to peer out at the approaching riders. But instead of Thomas McKenna and his hired guns, they saw Sheriff Daniels from Laramie, accompanied by 2 deputies. Jacob relaxed slightly, but remained cautious as he opened the door. "Evening, Sheriff," he called. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Daniels dismounted and approached the porch, his expression grim. "Jacob, Mrs. Harrison," he nodded to Sarah. "I'm afraid I have news about Thomas McKenna." Sarah's breath caught, and Jacob moved protectively closer to her side. "He's dead," the sheriff continued. "Got himself killed in a poker game in Cheyenne 3 nights ago. Accused another player of cheating, went for his gun, but the other fellow was faster." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief, and Jacob's arm came around her waist to steady her. "Are you certain?" Jacob asked. "Saw the body myself," Sheriff Daniels confirmed. "Thought you folks should know, given the circumstances. Mrs. Harrison, you're truly free now. No one's going to come looking for you anymore." After the sheriff and his men rode away, Sarah and Jacob stood on their porch, looking up at the star-filled Wyoming sky. Hope's soft breathing drifted from inside the house, and the night air carried the promise of spring. "It's really over," Sarah whispered. "Yes," Jacob agreed. "It is." She turned to face him, this man who had given her everything when she had nothing to offer in return. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When you proposed this marriage, you said it was a business arrangement. A partnership." Sarah took a deep breath. "But somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. At least I hope it has for you too." Jacob's hand came up to cup her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Sarah, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. I think I started falling in love with you the night Hope was born, watching you be so brave and strong. But I didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel obligated." Sarah silenced him by rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deeper as Jacob's arms came around her. When they finally broke apart, Sarah smiled up at him. "I love you too, Jacob Harrison, not because you saved me, but because of who you are, because you gave me back my faith in kindness and goodness." "And you gave me back my faith in the future," Jacob replied, holding her close. From inside the house came Hope's cry, and they both laughed softly. "Duty calls," Sarah said, but she made no move to step away from Jacob's embrace. "She can wait another minute," Jacob said, and kissed his wife again, properly this time, sealing the promise of their new beginning. As they finally went inside to tend to their daughter, for Hope was truly theirs now in every way that mattered, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the scent of snow melting and new grass growing. Winter was ending, and with it the long season of sorrow and fear that had brought them together. Spring was coming to the Harrison Ranch, bringing with it the promise of new life, new hope, and a love that had grown from the ashes of their separate tragedies into something stronger and more beautiful than either of them had dared imagine. In the distance, cattle lowed softly in the pastures, and the land stretched endlessly under the star-bright sky, full of possibility and promise. Sarah and Jacob had found their home, not just in the ranch house that sheltered them, but in each other's hearts where love had taken root and flourished against all odds. And in her cradle, Hope Elizabeth Harrison slept peacefully, surrounded by the warmth and security of a family that would love and protect her always, in this wild and beautiful land where hearts could heal and dreams could take flight on the endless Wyoming wind.